Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. You're here with your brother Mohammed Tawheed here at Guidance Avenue, and I am joined today with
Sebastian
and
Mohammed.
And I'm going to leave you to it, guys.
Sure. So the question that I was talking with my friends earlier, unlike the Bible, which has got a lot of different versions to it, the Quran has always had the same text throughout history. So we also, along with that, bear in mind we were talking about if you follow, let's say, 90% of the teachings but you don't follow 10%, does that qualify you to be good in the eyes of God? So we were asking the question, every single person on the planet has a different language, because even though you can write something in the same script, there's 7 billion different interpretations of a language. So if I say the word water, for example, to you, it might mean completely different things to you. Let's say if you had a terrible accident in water, it means a different thing to you as it does to me. And every single word can be like that in a language. So how is it possible to follow the exact teachings of the Quran if every single person has a slightly different interpretation of it? And that means that every single person has a slightly different interpretation of their belief.
Thank you very much. It's a brilliant question. It's actually a question that a lot of scholars in many different fields have actually grappled with. But the good thing about the Quran is that it actually gives us an instruction manual on how to deal with this issue. So it says in chapter 3, verse number 7, هو الذي أنزل عليه الكتاب منه آيات محكمات هن أم الكتاب. That he is the one who sent down the book with basically verses in it that are foundational verses, and these are the mother of the book, or the foundational verses of the book. وأخر متشابهات, and other verses which are ambiguous. فأما الذين في قلوبهم زيغ فيتبعون ما تشابه منه ابتغاء الفتنة وابتغاء تأويله وما يعلم تأويله إلا الله. Basically, it says that those who want to follow their own desire or the kind of corruptive elements or try and create some kind of confusion, they will follow the ambiguous verses and make them as kind of foundational. So because they are open to interpretation, so it's clear that you can have more than one interpretation. These individuals will try and use those verses as if they are foundational verses. So let's give you some live examples, right? In the history of Islam, there has never been a controversy surrounding the fact that God is one, for example. There's never been a theological controversy surrounding that. In the Quran, it's very clear, قُلْ هُوَ اللَّهُ أَحَدٌ, say He's God, one, the one and only. So there's never been a Muslim who's ever claimed to be a Muslim that has said that the Quran is anything that God is anything but one God. Same in chapter 48, in the final verse of that chapter, it says Muhammad Rasulullah, that Prophet Muhammad is the final messenger of Allah. So there's never been a controversy on that, if that makes sense. So in a nutshell, how do we kind of navigate from interpretation? And that which is clear is we look at the foundational verses of the scripture, and we basically try and make a theology out of that. Those ambiguous verses have to fit into the context of the foundational verses.
Yeah. Okay. So it's almost as if there's certain things that you don't need to argue about because they're very clear cut,
yes,
and that you can look at for instruction on the things that are less clear.
Exactly.
Right. That's very interesting. Okay. I can't think of a better answer to that question. That's fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah,
Cheers.
Well, good.
Thanks.
Any other questions you have?
So what else have we talked about? Okay. So we talked about what was the particular the 41 different theologians.
You just speak about what you
So we were talking about so after the Prophet there are different theologians throughout Islamic history.
Basically, it's about the Sufi tariqas.
Yeah.
There's an internal sort of dispute over that.
Yeah. So we were essentially talking about people who are not of God, but they obviously they're religious and they've interpreted it. So what I asked was, God is perfect, right?
Yeah.
And do we believe that human beings are perfect?
So we don't believe.
Yeah, not necessarily, right? So
saying infallible, the prophets we believe are infallible.
Yes.
In the sense that they cannot commit major sins, or nothing can interrupt the revelation.
Right.
So they're not perfect in the same
way.
But
other human beings aren't perfect, and that means that logically anything that comes from these human beings also cannot be perfect, including any religious interpretations or arguments, everything from straight theology to jurisprudence. So the question that I have is, when you're not following the hadith or the Quran or any other, or the word of God or a prophet, for example, when it's a theologian,
yes,
you are allowed to interpret it. Would that be correct? So you can argue with a theologian, not in the same way that you would argue with the word of the Quran.
Yeah, exactly. So a theologian's verdict, so to speak, is not binding on every individual.
Right.
So you're open to kind of challenge a theologian and ask them why they've come to that conclusion, because they could have very well interpreted the text of the Quran in an incorrect way. So from that perspective, that's where we have discussion. But what from like a layman's perspective, or someone who's new to Islam, really the way this would kind of actualize in reality is you would follow that which you feel is most correct, yeah, and you would not be judged for that which you get wrong, because at the end of the day you have a limited ability to do things in this world. So it's not if you are not able to get the correct interpretation of every single, let's say, jurisprudic situation, it doesn't mean to say that now you're going to be punished for that, because that would be an unfair thing to do. And that's why God there's you could say a maxim in Islam, لا يكلف الله نفسا إلا وسعها, that God does not overburden a soul with more than it can handle. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
But if I were to ask you now, I mean, would you accept? I mean, what's your position on God? Would you accept that there is a God actually that created the universe and is maintaining the universe, or this idea of an entity that's creating and maintaining the universe, fashioning everything that's been created, etc., etc.?
I err on the side of there would have to be a creator.
Yeah.
I wasn't raised like that. It's just the kind of conclusion that I reached. I'm not sure whether it would be a guy with a beard in the sky, like a painting.
Yeah, of course, I would agree with that. I mean, I don't think it would be a guy.
Yeah.
I mean, from an Islamic perspective, the Quran says, لا تدركه الأبصار وهو يدرك الأبصار, that vision cannot encapsulate God, and He encapsulates all vision. And it says in chapter 42, verse number 11, that ليس كمثله شيء وهو السميع البصير, that there's nothing like Him at all, and He is the all-seeing, all-hearing. So in other words, any image that we've gotten from, let's say, the Western media or any other media, or any image, generally speaking, that we've got from what constitutes God, would not be a correct image. Anything you can imagine.
Your imagination.
Yeah, including your imagination.
So you can't actually conceive of what God would physically look like, because it's not possible.
Yes, exactly. It's not possible to conceive what God looks like. Based on those verses in the Quran, لا تدركه الأبصار وهو يدرك الأبصار, that vision cannot encapsulate Him, but He encapsulates all vision. Yeah, and the same thing, ليس كمثله شيء. So our perception of God, or our idea of God, is not a God which has basically been made into a human being or any kind of creation. So this is called anthropomorphism. So we don't believe in anthropomorphized God. We don't believe in a Jesus type God.
Yeah.
We would say that Jesus Christ is a human being, right? And it's interesting to find that throughout history you'll find that there have been anthropomorphized versions of God, from Hercules to Zeus to Jesus. All of them have something in common. In the case of Hercules and Jesus, is that they were son of God, or they were son of a higher God, and obviously God themselves, in a sense. In the case of Jesus, I mean, once again, they're all anthropomorphized. But we will say that our conception of God is a non-anthropomorphized God, that which cannot reach human being in terms of imagination. And so, from that perspective, we would say that God, you cannot imagine God. Anything you can imagine is not God.
Right. You're just incapable of. There's no way you could get round it, or like you're not imagining it right. It would just lack the, if you like, the processing power or the ability to do it in the first place.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. So that's one thing. So we can't imagine God. That's one thing. God is all powerful. Our conception of God is as follows: God is an all powerful entity which has created all that exists, continues to maintain it, and creates the human being, allowed him to basically exist. Let me ask you guys a question. Let's open this up a little bit. Let me ask you, I was thinking about this. I tried this with a little bit with some people before, but let me try it again, yeah? I want you to imagine the following, Sebastian, okay? Imagine when you go to sleep, yeah? You wake up in your bed, isn't it? I wake up, I go to sleep, I wake up in my bed, where I slept initially. But I want you to imagine the following example, okay? I want you to imagine that you go to sleep, wherever you go to sleep, and you wake up and you find yourself on a train, yeah? Now I want you to answer the following question. What would you ask? What's the first thing you'd ask yourself?
How did I get here?
How did I get here? What else would you ask?
Who put me here?
Who put you here? What else would you ask?
Where's the train going?
Okay, thank you very much. Now let me tell you something, right? What would you do if you woke up on the train and you saw people, just living life, and you just started doing what they do? And you had these questions that you wanted to ask, how did I get here, where am I going, all these things, but you just suppressed them. What would you say of a person who suppresses these questions?
I'd say they become unhappy at some point. They wouldn't be able to suppress it any longer.
That's a good point. Would you also say that that person is critical or uncritical in their being, in their existential being?
Completely uncritical.
Uncritical. Is it justified to be uncritical in that way?
Absolutely not.
Okay, in the parable of the train is the parable of life. We woke up to a life, we woke up to a being here in this world. But we see now the Western, not to kind of knock Western culture, but I'm just saying that it's promoted nowadays that we shouldn't really think about these ultimate questions. We're on the train of life. We don't know whether, we know one thing, we're going to die. We're on the train of life. We woke up and we're distracted by everything around us. But the questions which are most fundamental to our existential being, how did I get here? Where am I going? Who am I? Where am I? All of these questions that you asked yourself, these questions are not being asked. And I urge everyone, including yourself, to ask these questions. So if I ask you, how did I get here? That question, if we apply it to the context of Speaker's Corner of London, not just Speaker's Corner of London, let's just say to the world that we live in. How did you get here? The atheistic response is you got here in a way which we can't really understand. It could be the multiverse, it could be that nothing created something, it could be, like Krauss actually says, a universe from nothing. That's just, for me, it's an unsatisfactory response. How did we get here? Well, don't worry about it too much. Don't think about it. What are we doing here? You make your own purpose, my friend. No, I mean, it doesn't seem that logical, does it? It doesn't follow. If you are on the train, you would not accept that particular logic. So I will ask you the question. What makes the best? Does it make sense to say? Does it make sense to say? How did you get here? You were created by an all-knowing entity. What you're doing here, that all-knowing entity has assigned and fixed a purpose for you. And where are you going? You're going to die. And there is something that's going to happen after death. Let me tell you something. Do you know the human experience? A lot of people say, well, how can you prove that there's going to be something that happens after death? All we can know is that which we can empirically justify. I say I disagree with that. When we go to sleep and we close our eyes and we dream, dreaming is an experience that most human beings have experienced, which has no sensual reaction. You don't open your eyes, but you still see. You don't need to try and hear someone physically saying that, but you still hear. Dreaming, and this is why Freud, by the way, he wrote a book on dreaming. It's a really interesting human experience. The human experience has shown us when we are in the state of unconsciousness, we can still have realities. And dreaming is an ample example of that reality. What we're saying is this: when you lose overall consciousness, when you're dead, and everyone will die, when you lose overall consciousness, it won't be the case that things will stop. We say that there will be a reality that you will then experience, just like a dream. But it's more real than a dream, and it will be more prolonged than just a dream. And that reality will be a metaphysical reality that the entity that we discussed before, that created you, will assign for you, will create for you, will allow for you to have. And this is the whole idea of the Day of Judgment, heaven, hell, all of that is there. I'm not saying these things are dreams. I'm saying these things are realities. But those realities don't depend upon the existential five senses, the being of a human being and five senses, these things. They can be rearranged. So here, does it make sense for us to say today that the reason why you're here is because you were created? What you're doing here is that you have a purpose. And your purpose is gonna extend to your after-death experience. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Yeah.
And does it make sense? Now look, I say for example, I'm an unbiased individual, I want to find out which is the correct religion. There are 6 major world religions. Honestly, I just want to find out which one is truth. Everyone is claiming to be right. I swear to God, it doesn't take that long to find out the answer. You know why? Of the 6 major world religions, only 2 are proselytizing. Only 2 religions actually attempt to have you as whatever they are. And that's Christianity and Islam. Judaism is not a proselytizing religion. Hinduism is not really a proselytizing religion. Sikhism is not really a proselytizing religion. And they're all regional religions.
Yes.
Yeah, and they're all religions which have backgrounds in some kind of, let's just say some mythology. And sometimes they'll be open about it. Like Hindus are very open about their mythology. And the mythology is very similar to Greek mythology, to be honest with you. Yeah? So here, we have two candidates, Islam and Christianity. For me, to narrow the gap, all I have to do is look at the basic theology. Forget about everything else. Just look at the basic theology. If I were to look at the basic theology of Christianity and Islam, I see that Christianity is a religion which talks about the Trinity, 3 in 1 and 1 in 3. That Jesus is God, that the Holy Spirit is God, and the Father is God, and all three are one. I would argue that this is a fundamentally flawed theology. And the idea that God is one is only really present in its purest and truest form, in its most logical form, in the religion of Islam. Based on that logic, if we accept the premise of revelation through human beings, it does make sense that God is one, and that there were a long line of prophets, which is the Islamic narrative, that there were a long line of prophets, starting with Adam, up until the final prophet, which we call Muhammad, all of which testified that there's only one God worthy of worship. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So here, does it make sense, or would you accept that Islam therefore is, from a theological or philosophical perspective, the most rational recourse?
I mean, you've given me one example. I agree with you on that one. I think the Holy Trinity thing is very strange. In fact, the Catholic Church admits it themselves.
Yeah, and as you've mentioned before, another example is, in terms of preserved text, Islam has the only preserved text. Let me tell you something, I'll defy anyone. And by the way, I'm here every week, I'm here every week, and people can always challenge me on this. I say the following, I say that Islam is the only religion where there has not been a controversy among Muslim theologians on the truthfulness or on the preservation of the Quran. Everyone attests that the Quran that they have is the Quran that we have. So in other words, there's no controversy in the Quran. The only religion which has a logical theology, the only religion which has a preserved text, the only religion which makes a series of predictions, all of which actualize. The Quran makes a series of predictions about empires. I'm not sure if you've heard of this. For example, the Roman Empire and the Persian Empire were in a war. And the Quran makes a shockingly precise prediction that in 3 to 9 years, the Roman Empire will defeat the Persian Empire in a nearby close land. The Prophet makes predictions about the future, about where Islam will spread. He tells us Islam will spread to Egypt. He tells us Islam will spread to Syria, to Jordan, to Yemen, to India, to Pakistan. To all of the places where we find Islam, there has been a prediction from the Prophet or in the Quran that Islam will spread in these places. The Quran makes a series of predictions about the fact, for example, that the Muslims will occupy the Arabian Peninsula and that it will happen within a period of time. These predictions, from a probabilistic perspective, give us another layer of argument, another evidence base, which is really this, which is that it cannot be the case, right? I would argue it cannot be the case that all of these predictions from a probabilistic perspective are completely accurate. Look at all the other religions. There are false predictions in the Bible. There are false predictions in the biblical text. I can tell you some of them, but I don't want to waste a lot of my time. A lot of them are very well known. Even Jehovah's Witnesses, I was making this point before. 1977, they said the end of the world is going to take place. And then when it didn't happen, they called it the Great Disappointment. The point is, predictions are a reasonable way for a person to see and decipher whether the person who claims to have knowledge from the all-knowing is telling the truth or not.
Yes, I agree with that.
And I'm saying that Islam has the best, or in fact, a blemishless record on this. It has no flaw in its record. Whenever Islam tells us something will happen, it happens. So if that's the case with every worldly situation and scenario, why wouldn't it be the case for something which is metaphysical and extra worldly, if you like? Yeah. And that's why we say that we have real rational reason to believe in Islam, not just because of these things, but just because of that God is one and all that, but because there's a real evidence base of it. Moreover, Islam, I would argue as well, Islam, it makes challenges to humanity. The Quran says, وَإِن كُنْتُمْ فِي رَيْبٍ مِمَّا نَزَّلْنَا عَلَى عَبْدِنَا فَأْتُوا بِسُورَةٍ مِّن مِثْلِهِ وَادْعُوا شُهَدَاءَكُم مِّن دُونِ اللَّهِ إِن كُنتُمْ صَادِقِينَ. That if you're in any doubt of what we have revealed to our slave, then bring something like it. So this constitutes what is referred to as the inimitability challenge. In other words, the Quran claims to be inimitable, and it claims that no one can produce anything like it. In other words, and this challenge is still open now, and you'll say, and someone, maybe a skeptic will say, well, I see this is quite a subjective challenge. This has clear, quantifiable ways of measuring it. Islam is the only religion. I mean, think about this. If I wanted to make a YouTube video today, yeah? Theoretically. Let's say we make a YouTube video. We make it as clickbait as possible and all that kind of stuff. How many Guidance Avenue or SC Dawah or any channel right now? What kind of views am I going to get? If I'm lucky, 100,000, 150,000, those kind of numbers we're talking about, yeah? And then after about 2-3 years, it will be forgotten. Yeah? Now imagine this. Someone has come with a book, which in the case is the Quran. And here we are in West Europe, Speaker's Corner, 2017, some 1,439 years after this person has come with this book, still talking about this book. That is a powerful thing. Someone will say, well, the same is true with the Bible. The same is true with the Bible, because we would say the Bible, there's parts of it which are in fact revelation. We agree with that premise. Okay, you're right. Yeah, some of it is revelation. Some of it is from God. The same is true with the Bhagavad Gita. Yeah, okay, some of it might be revelation. We're not saying it's all false. There's some bits of it which are true. But it's remained regional. Sikhism remained regional. Islam is the only religion, the Abrahamic religions really, are the only religions which have become international. And Islam is the only religion where I promise you guys, there's no second that goes by in any day where there's someone that's not mentioning the name of Muhammad or Allah. In any part of the world. You know how profound that is? In the Quran it says, وَرَفَعْنَا لَكَ ذِكْرَكَ about Prophet Muhammad. We have raised your status. And you're mentioning. Dhikr means mentioning. In other words, look at this. If I say here and now, and this is a challenge, let me relate it to the people of today, the YouTubers, yeah? I'm saying to the YouTubers, come out, make a video. I don't care if your name is I don't know what, yeah? Make a video that stays relevant for 1,439 years. Make a video. Do it. Then also say, I'm going to be mentioned by everyone for that period of time. وَرَفَعْنَا لَكَ ذِكْرَكَ is mentioned in chapter number 94 of the Quran. We have raised your status. Can you imagine the kind of profound effect this book has had? It's from a quantifiable perspective. This is not something which is qualitative, which is subjective. We're talking about sociological transformation. People are talking about now in almost any university you go in this country, they talk about political Islam. Any media is talking about Islam. Why is it so relevant? Why are they not talking about Sikhism? Why are they not talking about Buddhism? Talk about something else. It cannot stop pervading the minds of men. Islam is a religion which cannot stop pervading the minds of men. Why? Because Allah has told us that. That's a prediction. وَرَفَعْنَا لَكَ ذِكْرَكَ we have raised your status. Make a prediction like that. Do it. In the imitability challenge, we have to take this challenge seriously, because this challenge is serious. It's saying make something like it. Produce 3 lines that change the world. Make me say your name. Make my children say your name. Make my grandchildren say your name. Make my great-grandchildren say your name. Believe me, all of your great-grandchildren, whether you're a non-Muslim or not, or a Muslim, have said the word Muhammad before. All of them have said it. All of them have said it. How comes none of you will ever say, none of you can never make any book that will ever say anything other than no one will mention you. You're nothing. Plato, Aristotle, all of these individuals, they are foreign in the minds and the tongues of men, of many men. And they are, by the consensus of logicians, probably the highest of logicians and thinkers. This is what we've got to think about. Do you see what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Bro,
this... Another question on the language, if that's all right.
Yes, please.
So we talked earlier how human beings, being imperfect, cannot create anything that's perfect themselves.
Yeah.
And naturally, any language that we use is as a result of human societies. It evolves. And language is imperfect. Language has exceptions. English is classic.
Yeah.
In that it's not even phonetically pronounced. So it's a real havoc to try and navigate the English language.
Yeah.
I'm not so sure about Arabic or Farsi or any of the other Middle Eastern languages.
Yeah.
So around the time of when the Quran was written, there was a language being used by that society. It's naturally imperfect. It doesn't perfectly convey ideas.
Okay.
And yet God has the challenge of creating a perfect text, because anything that comes from God is perfect, necessarily.
Yeah.
So how is it that God is able to create a perfect text using an imperfect language? How do those two things reconcile?
Okay, do you know, this is a really interesting question. And this goes into the field of linguistics, and I swear there's lots of interesting things you can read about this, yeah? And I'll refer you to Noam Chomsky's Universal Grammar, yeah? Because it is an interesting thing. It's such a deep discussion that basically what he says is this. There are two schools of thought in linguistics, yeah? It's called the empirical school of thought, and there's the kind of Chomsky's Universal Grammar school of thought. The empirical school of thought is that you're suggesting that you can only output that which you've input. So in other words, you see a tree, you see this, you're told what that thing is called, you can only output that which is input. A lot of people have written books about this. This is called the empirical school of thought. On the other hand, you have Noam Chomsky, who argues, and others like him, universal grammarists, if you will, people that believe in the universal grammar school of thought. They say that actually human being has an innate ability to create something more with the grammatical constructions that they have. So in other words, the input is not as much as the output. And he says that the output is more than the input. Language is a really interesting thing. Is a very powerful mechanism by which and through which we communicate with other people. And obviously that's something which is specified to the human being. Animals don't have language in the same way that human beings have. They have sounds that they make, but they don't have language. Now, you're talking about Arabic and all these different imperfect. Look, I would make a point that actually Arabic, in terms of its grammar structure, is Arabic and Hebrew. I would say the Semitic languages, and this is my opinion, are the most logical, grounded, and mathematical languages in the world. I'll tell you why. If now I say, look, there's a big red bus in English language, I'm saying, look, there's a big red bus. If I said red big bus, does that make sense? No, it doesn't. There's a grammatical code, there's an algorithm in English language which makes it necessary for us to say big red bus. Size, color, adjective, or the thing being a noun, the common or proper noun. It has to be like that. Why? It's an arbitrary thing because English language is a result of different languages like Old English, French, when the Normans came in, all these different languages that are pretty much amalgamated into this kind of confusing language, which is now English. We know it, but the truth is its grammatical structures are not perfect and they're not mathematical in the same way as the Semitic languages are, because the Semitic languages have a purer line of transmission, you could say. Really, the linguists say that there is one, what they call it, the mother Semitic language. And from it, you have Syrianic, and you have Hebrew, and you have Aramaic, and you have Arabic. And all of these different things, I thought this guy was talking to me. And all of these different things are Semitic languages. Now you'll find that the Semitic languages have oft been chosen by God to communicate the message of whatever it is he's trying to communicate. There's a real reason for that, because actually it has the purest line to the start of civilization. In terms of language, the first thing we have written down is about 8,000 years old. 8,000 years old, yeah? That's the first thing we have written down. About 8,300, whatever it may be, 400 years old. The first civilization that ever came into existence was about 8,000, 9,000 years old, yeah? The cradle of the earth, as it was called, is about 8,000, 9,000 years old. The oldest civilization is probably the Mesopotamian civilization, followed by the Egyptians, followed by the Indus River civilization, followed by the ancient Greeks, the Minoans and the Mycenaeans, and etc., etc. Yeah, and then you have the Persians coming in, and then all these things afterwards. Why am I telling you this? Because actually, if we assume that the first thing we have in terms of language is about 8,400 years old, and in Mesopotamia they had Semitic language, which was in their case that was Semitic language of some sorts. Yeah, if that's the case, then we know now that this has a closer link to the Islamic and Quranic narrative. The Quran says وَعَلَّمَ آدَمَ الْأَسْمَاءَ كُلَّهَا ثُمَّ عَرَضَهُمْ إِلَى الْمَلَائِكَةِ فَقَالَ أَنْبِئُونِي بِأَسْمَاءِ هَؤُلَاءِ إِن كُنتُمْ صَادِقِينَ. In the Quran, in chapter number 2 of the Quran, the beginning of the chapter, I think verse 23 or something like this, it says that God taught Adam the asma, the nouns. How did he teach them? Through the agents of the angels. Language, therefore, is not something which is imperfect in its essence. It's something which is taught by God to the first human being, and that's Adam. and then it's transmitted. And so we say the purest of languages are those which God has chosen to narrate the Quran. And that's why one of our scholars, Ibn al-Jazari, he says, he calls it afsah al-lughat, is one of the most purest and clearest languages, Arabic, for that reason. Does that make sense?
That's a fantastic answer. I had no idea it was that complex and delicate, but that's brilliant. Yeah.
All right. So now we've talked about why believing in God makes sense. We've talked about why believing in the oneness of God makes sense. We've talked about reasons to believe in revelation. I want to ask you a question, Sebastian. Does it not make sense now at this stage to embrace Islam?
That's a huge question.
I'll tell you something. What happens when you embrace Islam is you're literally just saying two things. What happens when people come into Islam, and they come almost every week now into Islam, they say, yeah, let me just, I'll tell you about this. And what happens is that they say that God is one. They admit that God is worthy of worship. When we say worship, we're saying that in terms of ultimate authority, that goes to God. Ultimate authority should go to God. Yeah? Rousseau said, man is born free but everywhere in chains. We're saying the way to undo the chains, the shackles of civilization, and to free yourself and liberate yourself is to free yourself from the authority of man or the creation and put yourself into the authority of the Creator. So we say that when the two things you've got to admit is that God is worthy of worship and that Prophet Muhammad is his final messenger. That there were a long line of messengers, Adam, Moses, Jesus, all of these individuals were human beings. And that those human beings were given a message, and that message was the same thing I'm telling you now. They had to transmit it to their communities, and they had evidences to show why their message is true. At the end of it, people would accept or reject. So my question to you is, does that sound reasonable?
It does indeed. It does. I can't say it doesn't.
Yes. Yeah. So I would say that what you do is you say two short phrases in Arabic. This will initiate you into becoming a Muslim. There's no baptism required, don't worry about this. Yeah. Although if you do want to have a shower when you go home, it's recommended.
Can you tell me what happens if you decide not to become a Muslim in a year or so?
Yes, in the Quran. Yes, I will. Sorry, I should have told them that. Yes. In the Quran, in chapter 2, verse 256, it says, لا إكراه في الدين قد تبين الرشد من الغي فما يكفر بالطاغوت ويؤمن بالله فقد استمسك بالعروة الوثقى لا انفصام لها. It says that there's no compulsion of religion, that the truth is made clear from falsehood. Yeah, and whoever he disbelieves in the false gods and believes in the one God, then he has hold on to the tight grip, and that there is no releasing in that grip. So that's what the Quran says about.
So if he moves to Iran or
Iran is not a Muslim country, my friend.
In a year or so, and then stands in their speaker's corner and says, "I don't want to be a Muslim anymore." Can you explain what might happen?
Nothing will happen.
I should say that half my family lives in Iran, and they're all pretty much atheists. So
there you have it.
Your conception that they all hang each other from cranes because they have nothing better to do is quite false, to be honest.
Thank you. Thank you. Whoa, he knows.
In the Tehran speaker's corner and explain why they're atheist and.
Yes, Iran has bear in mind that it's Shia, it does have a large Christian population. You're talking about the bastion of civilization as well. So look, don't get me wrong, I also don't, no, you don't try and put me in a box. On the one hand, I don't agree with the media narrative. On the other hand, I don't agree with everything that anyone else says. But there is a balance, and
Fair enough. It's your choice.
Just for example, I just have to put this out there. I have a cousin. She goes night clubbing in Iran. She's also doing a veterinary degree. They have access to.
Yes.
They have access to beer if they want to use it. Not that they would.
Yeah.
It's not as savage as everyone makes out.
This is a good point, because actually in countries like Iran, a lot of people don't know this. Well, in countries like Iran, there are two kinds of, I would say, to oversimplify it, there are people who are completely not religious there. They don't actually live a religious lifestyle whatsoever, and they're allowed to exist. It's not like they're all, like you said, hanging from cranes. Yeah. Anyways.
Allowed to exist.
Yeah, they're allowed. Well, they're not killed, are they?
Can I say my interpretation? So we spoke earlier. We just said that there being no compulsion in religion. If a religion exists there to test your virtues and your faith, then obviously if you make someone follow the rules of any particular thing, then you are not testing whether they're a virtuous person.
Exactly.
In fact, what you're doing is, if you say I'm going to punish you if you don't follow my rules, then the only reason they're following their rules is for pure self-interest, which is the exact opposite of some of the virtues that religion teaches. So any religion, any at all, necessarily must say that that there is choice. Anything.
Yes, I really like that answer. And do you know what I want to say in addition to that? is that this point is a really interesting theological point. We say that the best reason to worship God is because that is the most appropriate thing to do. There's a beautiful verse in the Quran in chapter 76 verse 1 where it says about the insan, the human being, لم يكن شيء مذكورا. Yeah, he was not something which was mentioned. The point being is that whether human being is there or not, God still deserves praise. And that's why in the very first chapter, in the very first verse in the Quran, it says, Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Praise be to God, Lord of the worlds. And that's not connected to anything or anyone. In other words, no human being needs to praise God in order for him to have praise belong to him. It's the most appropriate thing. It's the most appropriate thing to describe God in the first place, worthy of praise. Now, going back to what we were saying before, the initiation process is literally 2 statements. That would make you a Muslim. Then after that, you'd learn how to pray. Obviously, the quicker the better. And you don't need to learn every single minute, like little detail about it, but we would support you with that. I'll give you my number afterwards. That sound all right?
Yes, of course.
So you can follow what I say in Arabic, and then afterwards I'll translate in English. Yeah. Ashhadu.
Wait, what is going on?
Oh, sorry, I'll say it in English.
Is this the conversion process?
Yes.
I think I'm going to have to spend a lot more time talking because, as I said to you, I need to talk more about it. But that wouldn't be the right thing for me to do at this time.
Okay,
but
good.
Perhaps after more Speakers Corner sessions.
No problem.
I've got to make... Yeah.
Yes.
Thank
Take
you
your
very
time.
much.
No, listen. That's one thing we would like to emphasize. That if you're not ready to do it, it's not something we want to force upon you. So just take your time, think about it. I'll still give you my number. So if you have any questions...
Why not?
Yeah, that would be good. Where are you from, by the way? What country?
I grew up in the UK, but as I said, I'm half British, half Iranian.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, no. I'll give you my number. Obviously, Mohammed will give you his number as well. It's been fantastic talking to you. Thank you very much for everything.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, man. That's incredible. Thank you.